Picture this. It's July 1969. You're one of the engineers who built the computer flying 3 men to the moon. A computer that has to work perfectly, because if it fails 3 days from Earth, there is no fix. No phone call to tech support, no spare part waiting in orbit. Whatever's already on board is everything you'll ever get. So here's the question I want you to actually sit with for a second. If you were building that computer, what would you build it out of? Take a guess. Most people's instinct is the best part for each job. Something fast for the math, something rugged for memory, something cheap for the boring stuff. Mix and match, because that's how you'd build almost anything else this much is riding on. That's not what they did. They built the entire computer, every circuit, every decision it ever makes, out of one single kind of chip. Not one type in a few variations. The literal same part, wired the same way, over and over. Fairchild called it the Type G. It packed 2 small circuits into one tiny package, and the actual flight computer that flew Apollo 11 used about 2,800 of them. Do the math, and that's something like 5,600 of these things. All identical, doing every single logical decision the whole spacecraft ever needed to make. If your gut reaction is, that sounds like an insane way to build something you're trusting 3 lives to, you're not wrong. It does sound insane. Stick with me, because the reason it actually worked is going to change how you look at every chip in every device you own. Here's why one identical part everywhere isn't actually the crazy choice. It's the careful one. Every different component you add to a spacecraft is one more way for something to go wrong that nobody's ever seen before. 10 different parts means 10 different failure modes to hunt for, 10 different suppliers, 10 different manufacturing batches, each hiding its own quirk. One part repeated 5,600 times means you only have to get one thing exactly right, and once there's only one thing to get right, you can torture test that one thing brutally. Heat it, freeze it, shake it, run it for months on end, until you actually trust it with 3 lives. And this wasn't a one-computer bet either. Across the whole Apollo program, Fairchild ended up shipping several 100,000 of these identical chips, the same tiny circuit, made and tested at a scale nobody had ever attempted for a single component before. NASA didn't pick one chip because some engineer wanted an elegant flex. There was no repair truck 3 days from Earth. No parts store. Whatever flew was everything they'd ever get. Boring and proven beats, clever and untested, every single time when there's no way to undo a bad bet. But here's the catch. Wanting to build a computer out of one repeated part and actually being able to pull that off are 2 completely different problems. Most electronics need dozens of different building blocks, each doing its own job. So before we get to how NASA solved it, you need to actually meet that one part. It's called a NOR gate, and to understand it, we're going back to something you already know. Go back to the AND gate and the OR gate from episodes 6 and 7. Both of those, underneath everything, were just switches wired to a light. Different wiring between them, but the same basic shape. Close the right switches, and the light turns on. Here's the change for today. Take that exact setup. Same switches, same light, but move the light so it sits above the switches, tapped off the wire below a resistor, instead of sitting directly in their path. And wire those same switches underneath it as a shortcut straight down to the ground wire. Before I tell you what happens, guess. The switches are still there, the light's still there. What do you think closing a switch does now? If your answer was turns the light on, that was the old rule, and it just stopped applying. Closing a switch here does the opposite. It kills the light. Every switch you close hands the current an easier path than the light. Straight down that shortcut. And current, like most things, takes the easy way out every single time. Light off, that's the whole mechanism. NAND and NOR, short for not and not or. Same wiring shape as last episode, just flipped from the light's point of view. Quick callback, because this connects directly to something I mentioned last time. Back in episode 6 and 7, I said real chips can't actually pull a clean, ready-to-reuse signal straight out of a plain and or circuit. That fixing it took one more piece, coming later. This is that piece, and this is later. A plain switch network naturally builds NAND and NOR first. And and OR are what you get afterward once that fix, an inverter tacked on at the end, gets added. And here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. NAND and NOR aren't some weird variant bolted onto AND and OR. They're the original. The plain AND or OR gate you learned last time is just this same circuit, with that extra inverter stapled on to flip the answer back the normal way. Take the inverter away, and the circuit gets simpler, not more complicated. This isn't just trivia either. Chip designers today still measure an entire chip's total size in a unit called NAND equivalent gates, because on real silicon, NAND is the actual starting point everything else gets built from, not the other way around. So if NAND is the real starting point, here's the question worth sitting with for a second. Could you build every other gate, not and or, out of nothing but NAND, wired different ways, and nothing else? Start with the easiest case. Take one NAND gate, and instead of giving it two separate inputs, tie both of its input wires to the exact same signal. You've just forced both inputs to always agree with each other. And a NAND fed the same thing twice can only ever do one thing to it: flip it. That's a NOT gate. One NAND, wired cleverly, does the exact same job as the entire single transistor from episode 5. No new part required. Push one step further. Take two NAND gates, feed your two real inputs into the first one, then take whatever comes out of it and wire that into both inputs of the second NAND. The same trick you just saw, turning that second NAND into a plain inverter. Invert a NAND's answer and you flip the flip back. What comes out the far end behaves exactly like AND, the gate from episode 6 where the light only stays lit when both switches agree, rebuilt with two NANDs and nothing else. OR takes the same move, just applied twice before the final step. Invert both of your inputs first, one NAND each, wired as inverters, then feed those two inverted signals into a third NAND. That third one does the real work. And what comes out behaves exactly like the OR gate from episode 7. Sit with that for a second. 3 gates, not and or everything from the last 3 episodes, rebuilt from 6 total NAND gates, wired 6 different ways, and nothing else. NASA didn't compromise by building their computer out of just one gate. One gate, wired enough different ways, was always enough for anything a computer needs to decide. And here's where this stops being a history lesson, because that same part never actually left. There's a real chance you're holding it right now. NAND flash memory, the chip inside every SSD, every USB stick, every phone you own, is named for exactly this gate because of exactly this trick. Wire a long string of memory cells one after another in series, and the whole string behaves like one giant NAND gate. Wire the same cells in parallel instead, and you get NOR flash, used in different places for different reasons, but built on the exact same 2 circuits you just watched, come together from switches and a resistor. The part that flew to the moon in 1969 and the part sitting in your pocket while you watch this are running the exact same idea. But there's one gate this particular trick doesn't build cleanly. One that's only true when its 2 inputs disagree with each other. Not when they match, not when either one alone is enough, only when they're different. That's next. And it takes 4 of these same NAND gates, wired one very specific way, to actually pull off.